let's go with our next topic in ecosystem, that is ecological succession. What is an ecological succession? Ecological succession is a natural process. It is a natural process where same locality becomes successively colonized by different group of communities of plants. So in simple terms, it tells how an area gets converted into a forest. Say there is an area some million years ago. So this empty area, it gets occupied by different groups of plants. That gets colonized by different groups of plants, and these colonies they grow together and they form a thick forest. In simple terms, this ecological succession tells how an empty area converts into a thick forest. So it is a natural process where same locality becomes successively colonized by different group of plant communities, is called as ecological succession. So there are two types of ecological succession. First one is primary succession and next one is secondary succession. What is primary succession? It is a type of succession taking place for the first time, is called as ecological primary succession. So succession taking place for the first time in a new area is called as ecological primary succession. Next one is secondary succession. If there was a well established habitat was there, but due to some natural disasters like earthquake, forest fires, etc., this habitat got destructed. Again it has become empty. So the succession taking place for the second time in this area is called as secondary succession. Succession taking place for the first time in a new area is called as primary succession, and the succession taking place when an established habitat gets destroyed due to some of the natural disasters and succession taking place on such an area is called as secondary succession. These are the types of succession. So primary and secondary succession. Now let's go with only the primary succession. So the primary succession has two types. One is hydrarch succession, another one is xerarch succession. Hydrarch succession is also called as xerosere. Xerarch succession is also called as xerosere. Hydrarch succession, it is type of succession taking place within the water is called as hydrarch succession or hydrosere, and the type of succession taking place within the dry land or within the stone is called as xerarch succession or xerosere. So there are different stages. First we shall go with hydrarch succession. So there are different stages within the hydrarch succession that we shall understand by looking at this diagram. So what happens is, in the initial stage, no any big plants or green plants are present. Only an area is filled with water. When water is there, automatically it will be attacked by the planktons. It may be phytoplanktons, algae, lower group of organisms they occupy. Once they occupy, they start to synthesize their own food material, and they undergo photosynthesis and they synthesize their own food material, and hence these phytoplanktons prepare their own food material, and these phytoplanktons are eaten up by zooplankton. So this process will be continued. So these small zooplanktons or phytoplanktons, what they happen, they will die and they fall to the ground. So when they fall to the ground, it increases the nutrients of the soil. When the soil nutrients increases, it becomes most favorable for the growth of next group of plants called as submerged plants. So as a result of the death of the planktons, what happened? The nutrients of the soil increased, so it becomes favorable for the growth of next group of plants called as submerged plants. These submerged plants, they have their roots and their complete body is within the water. They will not come outside the water. So what happens? They start to grow, and when they start to grow, they utilize the sunlight and they prepare their own food material. And when they die, what happens? They again fall to the ground. Again the decomposition takes place, and again it increases the nutrients of the soil, and along with it decreases or it shallows the total water. It shallows the pond. So the the depth of the pond is little bit decreases. So this type of conditions is most favorable for next growth of the next group of plants known as floating plants. Okay, these floating plants, what happens there? Their roots will be inside the water, but their leaf will be completely, or their shoot system will be completely on the surface of the water. When this happens, what happens? They utilize almost all the nutrients. They become dominated within this habitat. They absorb all the resources and they absorb all the sunlight. Once they absorb all the sunlight, the submerged plants cannot survive. Why? Because these floating plants are not allowing sunlight to enter into the water. So these submerged plants die. Once they die, again they increases the surround nutrients of the soil. This becomes favorable for the growth of next type of plants called as next stage called as reed swamp stage. In reed swamp stage, what happens? The plants which are just, their root system is just immersed in water, that is between the few inches, the water will be few inches, so their root system is just inside the water, their complete shoot system is completely outside. Then what happens? They again start to dominate. Once they start to dominate, all these organisms, this floating plants, submerged plants, everything, they die and they form the soil, and again the nutrients increases. Hence when the nutrients increases, it becomes, the pond becomes still more shallower. Again the depth of this pond decreases, and this becomes favorable for the growth of next group of plants called as Marsh Meadow stage. This stage is called as Marsh Meadow stage. Here what happens is, the depth of the water is almost decreased. Only few centimeters of water is present. So in such type of water, the grasses starts to grow, some thick and the grasses which grow in very height, such type of grasses start to grow within this region, and they dominate this region, and all the other organisms, small remaining organisms, they die and they become soil. Once they become soil, and again this becomes the water, the depth of the water is completely zero. Now it is almost a land. Once it has become, this becomes favorable for the growth of next stage of plants called as woodland stage. Here the small shrubs will start to grow. As the small shrub starts to grow, it gives rise to the next stage called as forest stage. So here the large trees are present. So here this is what the hydraulic succession is. Here it started with the phytoplanktons. Next it gave rise to the submerged plants. Submerged plants gave rise to the floating plants. Floating plants gave rise to the reed swamp plants. Reed swamp plants gave rise to the marsh meadow. Marsh meadow gave rise to the woodland. Woodland gives rise to the climax stage, that is forest. So this is how the forest is formed. So initially there were no plants, there were only water is present, and within the water only the microorganisms were present, and through series of succession it has given rise to the forest. In this succession, the first occupied group of plants are called as pioneers. Means these are the pioneers, or the organisms which occupy for the first time in the process of succession, which occupy the habitat for the first time in the process of succession are called as pioneers, and the communities which occupy in the last stage, which becomes dominant, which occupy the habitat in the last stage and become completely dominant, this stage is called as climax stage, and the intermediate stage is called as transformational stages. First one is pioneer, another one is climax. Communities are important. Okay, now once again we will see the definition of ecological succession. What the definition of ecological succession tells: it is a natural process where same locality becomes successively colonized by different groups of plant communities. It is a natural process where the same habitat is occupied by different groups of plant communities is called as ecological succession. Here it is an example of hydraulic succession. It starts within the water. Next one is, we shall go with xeric succession. Xeric succession, as I told earlier, it starts within the dry land or within the big rocks. It is known as xeric succession. It is also having different stages. Let's go with the different stages of this xeric succession or xerosphere. First, what happens? There is a big rock. This rock is occupied by the lichens. Lichens is an association of algae and fungi. These lichens, what happen is, they produce certain chemicals. They occupy and also they absorb moisture from the atmosphere. Once they absorb moisture from the atmosphere, they start biological activity. Once the biological activity of this lichen started, they produce certain chemicals. Those chemicals having a withering effect on the rock. Those chemicals helps in withering of rock. So this rock starts to wither, means it starts to convert, big rock, it starts to convert into small soil particles. So within this, the rock, this lichens are getting moisture with some oxidating chemicals. They are withering the rock and also they are getting soil, so they grow luxuriantly. Once they grow luxuriantly, they give rise to the growth of next group of lichens called as foliose lichens. So this one is called as, next stage is foliose lichen stage. Here foliose lichens, these foliose lichens are bigger than crustose lichens. They grow on the crustose lichens. Once they grow on the crustose lichens, what happens? They have the activity similar to the stuff crustose lichen, but the rate of activity is very high. Their rate of, in crustose lichen, the rate of activity is very less. In foliose lichen, the rate of activity is very high. And again, they absorb lot of moisture from the atmosphere. They produce lots of chemicals, so that more amount of rock is withered into a soil, and hence this give rise to the next stage called as mosses. In mosses, what happens is, some amount of the rock is converted into soil. See here, this is a complete rock. Here some amount of the rock is withered and converted into a soil. So this becomes favorable for the growth of a small group of plants called as mosses. As the mosses grow, what they absorb all the nutrients present within the soil, within this rock. How the nutrients are present? Why? Because this crustose and foliose lichen, they die and they undergo decomposition, and there within the soil, the nutrients increases, hence they absorb these mosses absorb all the important nutrients, and they start to synthesize their own food material, and again still withering takes place, hence it gives rise to the growth next stage, that is called as grass stage. Here what happens is, next group of plants called as grass community starts occupying. Once this grass or herbs start to grow, what happens? Their activity is still more, the rate of activity is still more than when compared to the mosses and lichens. So the nutrients again increases. They start to absorb all they start to utilize the sunlight and prepare their own food material, and again the rock gets withered. Still withering of the rock continues, and this gives rise to the growth of next stage called as shrub stage. So now the shrubs start to grow. Usually the shrubs, they grow in very high number. Why? Because their rate of activity is very more, and they are usually big in their size, and their withering activity is also very much high, and this particular habitat is having more number of nutrients. Why? Because it is having crustose lichen, dead organisms or decomposed material of crustose lichens, foliose lichens, mosses and annual grasses. So what happens is, here the soil fertility is very rich, so they start to grow very luxuriantly, and this rock is completely or almost converted into a soil, and then this shrubs community give rise to the next stage called as forest stage. Here what happens is, they completely convert this rock into a soil through the process of withering, and there the nutrients are also very rich. This favors the growth of the rock trees very luxuriantly. These are the stages of Xerox succession or zeros. Here the pioneer community is crustose lichen. Why it is pioneer? It is occupying for the first time. And next one is climax community is forest. Here this is the last occupying community, hence it is climax community, and here is forest community. So this is about succession. We have studied ecological succession. What is ecological succession? It is a natural process where same locality becomes successively colonized by different groups of plant communities is called as ecological succession. Within the ecological succession, we need to know pioneer community and climax community. The first community occupying in a new area is called as pioneer community, and the community which is occupying the last within the last is called as climax community, and intermediate one are called as transitional communities. We have two types of ecological succession. One is primary succession and secondary succession. The succession taking place for the first time is called as primary succession. The succession taking place for the second time where already an earlier one more succession which has taken but it has destroyed due to the natural disasters, and the succession taking place within that habitat for the second time is called as secondary succession. The succession in plants, primary succession in plants is of two types. One is Hydrax succession and another one is Xerox succession. Hydrax succession is a succession taking place within the water. Xerox succession is taking place within the dry land. This is about the succession. And next we shall go with nutrient cycling. What is a nutrient cycling? Nutrient cycling can be defined as the movement of nutrient elements through the various components of ecosystem. The movement of nutrients from different components through the different components of ecosystem. Movement of nutrients through different components of the ecosystem is called as nutrient cycling. From producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers to tertiary consumers to decomposers. This is known as nutrient cycling. So we have two types of nutrient cycling. One is gaseous nutrient cycling and sedimentary nutrient cycling. The first one is gaseous nutrient cycling. In that we are going to study carbon cycle. So carbon is an important element which is present within the nutrient, carbon is an important nutrient present within the atmosphere. So there is about 49% of the carbon which is present within the living organisms in the form of dry weight. Okay, and 71% of the carbon is dissolved within the ocean. 71% is present within the oceans and 49% is present within the living organisms. So how this carbon dioxide gets or transfers from one organism to another organism and how it is going back to its environment, that we are going to study in this carbon cycle. So first what happens is we have producers, trees and small plants. What they do, they undergo photosynthetic process. For the photosynthetic process, what they need carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide is present within the atmosphere. This carbon dioxide is absorbed by the producers. So trees or plants, they convert that carbon into a glucose. When they convert the carbon into glucose, it is eaten up by the herbivores. So when this from plants, it is from producers, it is getting transferred to primary consumers. From primary consumers, secondary consumers. From secondary consumers, it is transferring into secondary consumers, and secondary consumers, it is converting into tertiary consumers. Once the tertiary consumers die, it is undergoing detritus cycle, means decomposition, and again through the decomposition the carbon is releasing within the atmosphere. So see here, when this plant dies or when it falls to the ground or an animal dies, what happens? This carbon is releasing into the atmosphere through the process of decomposition. This is in the terrestrial ecosystem. And next one we have aquatic ecosystem. In aquatic ecosystem, what happens? In aquatic ecosystem, phytoplanktons are there. Phytoplanktons, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they convert it into the glucose. These phytoplanktons are eaten up by the zooplankton. Zooplanktons are eaten up by the big fishes. So here the carbon is getting converted from producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers to tertiary consumers, and tertiary consumers to decomposers. And again, when they die, they undergo decomposition, and again carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. This is about aquatic ecosystem, and this is here is aquatic ecosystem, here is terrestrial ecosystem. Whenever they die, they undergo decomposition, and again the carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere. Okay, then next one is whenever the forest fire takes place. What happens whenever the forest fire takes place? It burns very quickly, so that again the carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Carbon is released into the atmosphere. And next one is we extract fossil fuels. When the fossil fuels are extracted, so what happens? We again take that fossil fuel, we extract fossil fuel, and we burn. And while burning, the process known as combustion, with the help of combustion, this carbon which is present within the fossil fuel, it is released again back to the atmosphere. So, and limestone and dolomite which is present within the deep layers of the earth, they are also acts as the source of carbon to the atmosphere, or source of carbon to the lithosphere in general nature. This is how the carbon gets cycled within the nature or within the atmosphere. So first what happens within the terrestrial ecosystem, they prepare their own food material, and from producers converting into the consumers. When the producers and consumers die, what happens? They undergo decomposition. From decomposition, carbon dioxide is released, and in aquatic ecosystem, phytoplanktons absorb carbon dioxide. So they prepare their own food material, and it is converted into primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Whenever they die, all are getting decomposed, and again it is releasing carbon dioxide to the environment. And whenever the forest fire takes place, carbon is released to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. Whenever when fossil fuels are extracted, we are going to burn the fossil fuels for the running of many machineries. So again the carbon dioxide is releasing into the atmosphere through the process known as combustion. So again the carbon is recycled back, and the major source of carbon in the earth is limestone and dolomite. This is about the carbon cycle. And next one is phosphorus cycle. It is here the carbon is the gaseous cycle, and phosphorus is sedimentary cycle. So what happens is, usually the phosphorus is present within the rocks. So what happens? How the soil gets phosphorus? When the rock gets withered, when the rock's material undergoes withering, when the withering takes place, what happens? The phosphorus is released into the soil. This is taken up by the producers. When producers, they prepare their own food material, and this is eaten up by the consumers. From producers, it is converting into primary consumers, primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, and these consumers, whenever they die, they undergo detritus cycle. Detritus cycle means decomposition. When the decomposition takes place, again the phosphorus is released back to the soil. So again the soil is having the phosphorus. This phosphorus is taken up by the producers. This is about phosphorus cycle. First, what happens? A rock is within the earth, the soil is there. Within the earth, the phosphorus is there. This phosphorus undergoes withering and gets the phosphorus, the rock materials undergo withering. So in the process of withering, phosphorus is released into the soil. When the soil gets it is absorbed by the producers. From producers, consumers. When consumers or producers die, again they undergo decomposition. When the decomposition, and again the phosphorus is released back to the soil, again it is absorbed by the producers. This is about phosphorus cycle, and by this we completed ecosystem. And the next presentation we shall discuss some of the important questions which are discussed, which are appeared in last 5 years of the NEET examination. For any notes notes and other study materials, you can log on to my Telegram channel, where it is in description I have given the link to my Telegram channel. Please, if you like the lecture, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.